You awaken to a freshly penned agenda on your desk, the ink still glistening, and the very air seems to tilt as though the world's compass has lost its true direction. They term it coordination, yet beneath that, you sense a subtler word, subservience, soft as velvet but harsh as steel, like a hand tightening around your throat. You beam for the cameras, shoulders held high, while your pockets swell with invisible burdens, each promise weighted enough to alter your every step. With every signature, it feels as though you are relinquishing your very shadow. And each clause returns reminiscent of a lengthy night, echoing with footsteps that are foreign to you. Once, you spoke in the clarity of daylight, but now your words arrive as whispers, delayed, translated, approved, like a letter revealed before you've had the chance to read it. Around the table, your allies nod in perfect synchronization, yet a disturbing realization dawns. This rhythm lacks agreement. It's merely a metronome, tallying your debts. The pages of the agenda seem to turn on their own, as if a breath of wind resides within the paper, and you ponder who instilled such obedience in the air. A tightening sensation grips your ribs at the mention of support, for support is what beams provide until a ceiling grasps that it can, indeed, collapse quietly. They extend to you a lifeline woven from filigree gold, and you feign ignorance of how it curls like a leash when you attempt to grasp it. In solitude, your ledgers unfold like fractured mirrors, each reflecting a visage you know only in pieces, a chiseled jawline, weary eyes, a confidence that feels borrowed. The markets outside murmur like a crowd waiting just behind a curtain, and you sense they anticipate your misstep far more than your oratory. You convince yourself this is leadership, yet the words taste metallic, as though you have been biting coins to authenticate their value. Each new framework arrives draped in polished rhetoric and gentle applause, but beneath it all, you hear bolts being fastened, each turn a reminder of your owed responsibilities. You reminisce about a time when choices stretched before you like vast oceans, but now your options resemble narrow bridges constructed by strangers demanding silent tolls. The agenda vouches for stability, and you almost laugh bitterly, for stability resembles a cage that remains still only after the lock clicks shut. You observe smaller nations lean into warmth's embrace, and a pang of envy surges within you, as surrender seems far more easily achieved in a room so cold. A minister discreetly slides you a note with just 3 words, and your stomach drops, as if gravity has suddenly remembered its ties to you. You maintain a facade of calm, yet inside, something fractures like a mast splintering just before the storm acknowledges its arrival. They request solidarity, and you present it cautiously, as one hands over matches in a parched forest while insisting upon responsibility. When the meeting concludes, you linger alone in the hallway's dim light, the agenda's echo trailing behind you, both patient and ravenous. Your phone buzzes with congratulations that feel more like condolences, and you learn to respond with rehearsed warmth while your pulse stumbles along. The agenda follows you home, nestled in your briefcase, yet it appears on your kitchen table as if it never required your consent. You attempt to sleep, but the ceiling morphs into a spreadsheet of stains, each blot mirroring a silent figure that refuses to balance, each shadow a question without a voice. In the morning, your advisors present charts, yet you perceive not lines but ligaments, and every trend appears as a tendon fraying gradually. They assure you confidence is returning, and you nod, fully aware that confidence is merely perfume doused over the smoke of doubt. A lender refers to it as a partnership, grinning through the speakerphone, and you envision a ring slipped over your finger while your hand lies numbed. As you inscribe yet another memorandum, your pen seems to gain weight, as if filled with sand from shores you no longer possess. At a press conference, you pledge the future, and your tongue stutters momentarily, as if it were brushing against a live wire, as though truth has become electrified. A new facility opens, adorned with a ribbon and music, yet all you perceive is the hissing sound of air escaping a tire, slow and relentless, the sound of motion coming to an end. Your ministers debate behind closed doors, their voices as frail as paper, and you realize even anger has been portioned with care. The language of the agenda weaves its way through your institutions like ivy, seemingly polite and lush, until you realize it has constricted the very windows, sealing them shut. The days of negotiation linger in your memory, yet now, each proposal arrives neatly packaged, a gift box whose lid has already been sealed shut. Your currency resembles a photograph left to bask in the sun, the hues first fading at the edges, and then the visage, until even the name you once identified with blurs away. You gather with the workers, their hands rough yet sincere, and their quietness carries more weight than any uprising, for it betrays their lost expectations. A foreign delegation strolls through your docks, admiring the scenery, while you observe their eyes calculating distances the same way buyers evaluate a property. That evening, you practice your upcoming speech, each sentence tasting diluted, like watered-down wine, superficial and crafted to be consumed swiftly. You begin to shun mirrors, not from pride, but because the reflection staring back resembles a rented facade, like a house staged for a family that isn't yours. One day, a shipment stalls, and the entirety of your operation trembles, as if the absence of a single bolt could compel the whole apparatus to reveal its secrets. You request additional time, and they grant it with a graciousness akin to a fisherman allowing line to a hooked catch patient, self-assured and unhurried. When you finally exhale, it does not feel like relief. Rather, it embodies a surrender that learns your breathing patterns and begins to nestle within you. Weeks elapse, and the agenda no longer makes its presence known. It now moves stealthily, like a houseguest who has memorized the creaks of your floorboards. You observe decisions being made even before you articulate thoughts, your words arriving belatedly, like apologies sent after a door has firmly closed. Invitations proliferate, summits piling up like stacked plates, and each one leaves you increasingly hungry despite the abundant offerings. They commend your restraint, and you come to understand that restraint is the sensation of a hand tightened too firmly to grasp. As night falls, the city lights take on a different hue, as if some belong to you while others merely lease a place within your skyline. You consent to yet another concession, which feels less like a decision and more akin to emotion ingrained through duress. The architects of the agenda now speak in hushed tones, confident enough to murmur, for walls remain silent once they carry the burden. You come to the realization that emergencies are no longer mere accidents. They are scheduled occurrences, arriving with grace, donning the attire of inevitability. A loan comes due, and the date feels like a forgotten birthday, bringing disappointment instead of joyous commemorations. You reassure the public, hands outstretched, palms visible, as though to demonstrate there is nothing left to conceal or clutch tightly. Your institutions adjust swiftly, bending with a gracefulness that leaves you pondering when adaptability morphed into another term for submission. Foreign headlines label you as responsible, a designation that settles around your neck like a collar slipped on ever so gently. You endure yet another dinner, silverware clinking like distant bells, each toast reverberating with unspoken conditions hanging in the air. The agenda seeps into education, infrastructure, and everyday routines, rendering even the most mundane mornings seemingly pre-authorized. You recall anger as a heat, but now it manifests coldly, precisely, seeping inward like a surgeon's precise incision. A strike looms threateningly, then dissipates, not through resolution but through fatigue experienced far too soon. You catch yourself defending the agenda aloud, and the sound of your own voice astonishes you more than the reactions of others. Dependence doesn't arrive like a fall. It settles in like sediment, layer upon layer, until movement feels foreign and impeded. You search for an exit, yet discover only corridors marked extension, renewal, and adjustment, all softly illuminated. Deep within, you come to terms with the notion that collapse requires no cacophony, only time, collaboration, and your unwavering signature. At this point, the agenda resembles less a matter of policy and more an anticipated forecast, something you prepare for rather than contest. You gauge the passage of time not by the setting sun, but by impending deadlines, realizing that time itself appears to charge you for every moment of stillness. Advisors cease to warn and instead begin to anticipate, their tones steady, as though they have embraced the inevitability they now offer as a service. You acquiesce to yet another adjustment, and it slides into position so seamlessly that the sound of a lock turning almost escapes your notice. The public grows increasingly subdued, not from faith, but from the weariness of translating lofty promises into everyday necessities. As you wander through factories, machines hum dutifully, but their cadence feels borrowed, like a melody played on borrowed time. A budget meeting disperses prematurely, not out of consensus, but because no one wishes to utter the unspoken decisions that linger in the air. You observe your hands tremble only when solitude envelops you, as if privacy is the last sanctuary where truth dares to reveal itself. They label your system as resilient, and you ponder when resilience morphed into the art of enduring without ever healing. Another extension arrives, disguised as relief, akin to the very air that sustains your consciousness yet keeps you from standing tall. You find yourself envying disasters, for at least they announce their arrival before they strip away everything you hold dear. At night, the agenda converses in your own voice, rehearsing the events of tomorrow long before you open your eyes. You forego a trip to the countryside, plagued by uncertainty over whether the land still remembers you as its steward. Foreign investors stroll through your schools and hospitals, lauding the efficiency they perceive, posing measured inquiries about upkeep. You endorse the responses provided, aware that care has been reshaped into yet another resource to be tended to with caution. Whispers of alternatives circulate, and you gently stifle them, surprised at how instinctual suppression has become. You come to understand that choice has not dissipated. Rather, it has been priced beyond your means. The agenda no longer solicits your input. It informs you, delivering updates akin to the stark announcements of a doctor sharing grave news. You publicly profess gratitude, thanking partners for their patience, even as you internally tally the cost of what that patience has supplanted. Deep within, you are aware that the very structure that supports you is also the one that is gradually flattening you. The language shifts yet again, softer this time, akin to furniture being rearranged in your sleep, familiar silhouettes positioned just slightly askew, enough to cause discomfort. You validate maintenance over ambition, mending leaks with meticulous care, knowing that each patch prolongs the life of that which is already possessed. Children study new geographic layouts in class, lightly sketched borders, and vaguely labeled eras, as if even certainty has become a forbidden subject. You absorb experts' definitions of patience, recognizing it as merely enduring silence without the ability to interject. Another review concludes positively, which signifies nothing has altered except the compilation of topics now deemed unsuitable for discussion. Your independence now exists in footnotes, fine print that endures solely because scrutiny has waned. You sense the atmosphere ease when you concede swiftly, relief coursing through the room like warmth when the struggle finally ceases. Infrastructure deteriorates at a rate surpassing memory, and you authorize care schedules under the assumption that someone else will ultimately complete the task. A port temporarily closes for efficiency, reopening with a newfound quiet, its remnants echoing with dialects that are foreign to your ears. You begin to conflate tranquility with mastery, forgetting that calm waters can also conceal depths devoid of support. The agenda elevates compliance through empty accolades, and these praises arrive like sugar, dissolving immediately, yet leaving the hunger for genuine acknowledgement unquenched. You pose for photographs alongside partners who seem to tower over you with each passing year, though in truth, no one has actually grown. In your private notes, planning gives way to conditional statements if this, then that, reducing survival to mere syntax. The term temporary repeatedly reverberates, unchanged, like a guest who refuses to pack, yet insists departure is imminent. You become acutely aware of how frequently you articulate within constraints, and how infrequently anyone questions who imposed them. A factory ceases operations quietly, devoid of sirens or speeches, with the lights extinguishing in an orderly fashion, one row after another. You find yourself at the closing event, applauding politely, for morning has been reserved for a later date. Dependency morphs into something foundational rather than personal, providing an escape from blame while achieving a chilling permanence. You dream of running, yet each path slopes gently downward, unchallenging and irrevocable. When you awaken, you no longer seek resistance. Instead, you seek equilibrium within the descent. The meetings shorten, becoming efficient, akin to rituals perfected once belief has ceased to matter. You observe how often silence is commended, and how infrequently questions manage to survive the confines of the room. Reports arrive refined, edges smoothed, numbers supplanted by reassurances that reek of rehearsed comfort. You endorse continuity plans predicated on the assumption that tomorrow will mirror today, albeit in a diminished form. The architects of the agenda have ceased to attend. Their legacy now speaks through their work, woven into the fabric of daily life. You inherit responsibilities as one might inherit battered furniture, burdensome, imposed, and impossible to discard. Public discourse has devolved to mere tone rather than substance, as if volume remains the last vestige of choice. You stroll past murals heralding progress, noticing the paint already peeling at the edges. Another sector undergoes a quiet reorganization, the term temporary stamped once more, unyielding, patient. You realize promises do not fade. Instead, they accrue, pressing like sediment against the glass of your reality. Your signature has become instinctual, a motion performed so often it bypasses the necessity for thought. A partner lauds your predictability, and you come to recognize that this predictability signifies a surrender draped in politeness. You find yourself at a ceremony celebrating resilience, where the medals feel weighty, the applause faint, and eyes deliberately averted from yours. The agenda now surfaces as gentle reminders, notifications, nudges that you no longer bother to resist. You cease counting each loss individually. The collective weight is far simpler to bear than the tributes of names. Even dissent adapts, articulating itself cautiously, framed as concern, safe, and easily disregarded. You can sense the ground beneath you has not vanished. It has merely been leased from your grasp. A deadline inches closer before slipping past, yet nothing concludes, which sends a chill through you. You reflect on when mere survival usurped ambition without anyone casting a ballot. By this point, the collapse feels absolute, not because it has concluded, but because it has become the norm. The agenda ceases to feel like something external, as you come to memorize it, just as one internalizes their own breath. You become acutely aware of how seldom anyone inquires about your desires, and how infrequently you can recall the answer. The economy emits a low hum, akin to a machine idling, consuming fuel merely to ensure its presence is known. You sanction yet another rollover, and time bends with politeness, feigning innocence in its repetition. The populace rejoices in the illusion of stability, mistaking the silence of alarms for the embrace of safety. You witness innovation retreating into laboratories, doors closing softly, guarding the flicker of hope that remains. A journalist probes into the concept of sovereignty, and the term feels archaic, as if it were locked behind glass. You respond with caution, polishing each phrase until it emanates reassurance rather than the starkness of truth. The agenda favors the consistent, and inconsistency has morphed into the sole remaining transgression. You find yourself attending fewer crises now, as they meld into a routine that no longer requires a change of attire. Supply chains flow like silent rivers, and you intuitively discern which banks possess the current by its gravitational tug. You awaken to peaceful mornings that feel borrowed, like tranquility rented on a month-to-month basis. A committee lauds your discipline, and you comprehend that discipline has transformed into obedience that has learned how to smile. You start preparing successors, imparting balance over vision as a core tenet. The future is no longer a realm of imagination, it is now a managed existence. You perceive history decelerating, thickening like the air before a rain that never materializes. The public adapts with finesse, survival skills overtaking ambition in daily dialogues. You ponder whether the collapse will ever be declared, or if it will simply vanish into archives. The agenda ceases to evolve, not due to completion, but because it no longer necessitates updating. You remain resolute at the center, realizing the world hasn't shattered. It has molded itself around you. The agenda feels lighter now, as weight becomes imperceptible when the body transforms to accommodate it. You navigate through days on autopilot, guided by cues you did not create yet now interpret with flawless ease. Meetings conclude with such an effortless consensus that it seems choreographed by the very force of gravity. You understand that control hasn't vanished. It has been redistributed, rendering your share merely symbolic. The dialect of caution supplants the language of dreams without ever proclaiming its transition. You observe younger leaders closely studying your demeanor rather than your rhetoric, absorbing the nuances of survival through mimicry. The system esteems stability above all, confounding stillness with wisdom and indecision with care. You cease to inquire about who stands to gain, as the answer no longer alters the inevitable outcome. Beyond, life continues neatly, adjusted to constraints like furniture tailored for smaller spaces. The success of the agenda is gauged by tranquil streets and mornings that unfold predictably. You recall a time when uncertainty was fraught with danger rather than a source of solace. Now, certainty arrives neatly wrapped, delivered without question, and accepted as gospel. Society lauds its synchronization, unaware that it has conditioned itself to breathe in a shallow manner. You perceive a dwindling of ambition, not through ruin, but through an unexpected politeness. Future generations will label this age as pragmatic, because it is easier to identify tragedy when it erupts loudly. You find yourself at the nexus of agreements that no longer necessitate your faith. The downfall unfolds seamlessly, devoid of ruin, smoke, or any form of resistance. What endures operates with efficiency, compliance, and an unsettling timelessness. You finally grasp the truth. Nothing was seized by force. It was surrendered willingly over time. And in that quiet surrender, the world transformed, silently, for eternity,